Tessa, if you would like to tell us a little bit more about you, I'm so happy to have you on our show today. And our listeners are going to love learning about you because you just have such a beautiful heart. And I just love the values that you have and the ways that you have been looking at your experiences. And so just tell us about your story.
Sure, I'd love to. So I'm Tessa Lewis, and I'm the founder of the Best Self Collective, and it's also a new podcast, the Best Self Collective podcast. And yeah, it's been a long road to get here. I've been a lover of all things personal development since I was a child, and it's just been like my joy and my calling really to be in this realm of just working on myself, helping others work on themselves, like helping us all just be the best version of ourselves has just been something that's just been a natural interest of mine. And I'd actually also say talent of mine. I feel like people have told me my whole life I've helped them see new possibilities within themselves. And there's just like
Wow.
nothing more fun to me than that. There's nothing more cool to me. So that's just something that's always been a passion of mine. And now I get to share it with a brand new podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say, how do you think you developed that so young, that personal self-development and helping others in that way? How, like, can you remember some memories about doing those things?
Sure. So there's a couple memories I have. So the first thing that comes to mind is that my mother told me that I've been listening to Oprah since before I was born because she was listening to Oprah when she was pregnant with me. So like Oprah has been a huge part of my life. Another story I like to tell is the fact that like my parents had a big bookshelf of books when I was a child, and a lot of those books were personal development books and books by motivational speakers. And so when I was a little girl, I used to stay up late and read these books. Like I didn't want to read the bedtime stories and Dr. Seuss. I was reading Zig Ziglar and Tony Robbins and Bob Proctor from like the time I could actually read. And so that had a big impression on like my thinking and mindset and my understanding that words with intention matter and all those kind of things.
This is just so incredible. I mean, literally, this has just been your environment before
Yeah.
you were even born. This is really fascinating. So tell more about your life experience.
Sure. When I was young, I used to think I was going to be a counselor. I thought I'd be some sort of psychiatrist. I thought I'd always be in the realm of like helping people with their problems. That was also very important to me. I should also mention my mother is she was a social worker for a while. I just saw her helping people as her job and her passion. I just kind of felt there's also like a bit of a responsibility to help others where you can. Other people are gifted with sciences and math, and other people are good at music and things like that. I was good at being present for people and holding space for them and giving suggestions of things I had heard that had helped other people. So kind of sharing wisdom, if you will. And so that's just been the path I've wanted to do. I didn't choose that path professionally, but like this is definitely what I do on my time off is work on myself. And I love to be in communities with other people who are working on themselves too.
That's awesome. And so tell me about some experiences that you have had where you have applied these things and where you've had some paradigm shifts in your life.
Good question. It's a juicy question. I mean, it's almost hard to pick one because that's kind of how I operate. I just use my techniques in my day. It's very tempting to want to be negative or just to feel hopeless about something. I'm protecting myself by not giving in to the temptation to feel total despair about something that I don't need to feel despair about right now. Also, I think in terms of helping others, it's very easy to have a pity party, but when you kind of shift yourself into the mindset of like, how lucky am I to have the problems I have right now? There are people with way worse problems, and maybe there's a silver lining here. Maybe there's a gift in here somewhere, and I think that kind of thinking takes a certain level of mental discipline, to try to train yourself to see that. And, sometimes you're in the thick of it and you can't see anything positive and you want to curse everybody out or you want to cry or scream or whatever. But what I try to do is like not spend too much time there and kind of drift myself back to that centered place.
Yeah. So many of our listeners are going through very difficult challenges in their life. Some have long-term health problems. Some have issues with trauma that they've experienced. Some have, addictions or their loved ones have addictions. And so some of these difficulties that they're dealing with are very long-term. And so trying to keep the mindset to help them, to help themselves and to help those that they love, it's very challenging. Could you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's just so important, like the power of the mind. There's something very powerful and magical about when we just choose to see the light and we choose to see the good in something. That opens us up to see the blessings in really terrible things sometimes, and really challenging things. And it just makes you more available to have deeper insight to things you hadn't seen before. When you're just stuck in the mire of something that's difficult, you're not as available for miracles term in terms of like shifting your perception from fear to love. As A Course in Miracles would say, it's not just a supernatural occurrence, it's what's happening in your mind and in your perception of things that can make everything so much better.
I love the Course of Miracles. I trained with Marianne Williamson, and yeah, yes. In fact, so I read Return to Love in the early 90s, and I just loved her book. It was just so profound the way that it impacted me. And then I started studying the Course of Miracles, and that to me is one of the greatest miracles, is when I can move from fear to love. And I feel like it's divine when it happens, because so many times my brain just is stuck on the fear, or it's stuck on the negative, and I'm praying for help, and I'm asking, please help me see this differently, But when that shift happens, many times I feel like I receive guidance, or insights or something. My eyes are open to see things that I didn't see before. And so that's fascinating that book influenced you. Tell me about how you became acquainted with Marianne Williamson and the Course in Miracles.
I don't even know. I mean, like, I feel like Marianne's been a part of my life as long as Oprah. I remember seeing Marianne on Oprah. Do you remember she used to be on Oprah like many, many times over the years? And Oprah said like many years ago that like Marianne was her spiritual guide or spiritual counselor, and everyone knows how spiritual Oprah is. So for Marianne to be her spiritual guide and teacher is like huge honor. And so I've just been a huge fan of Marianne's since time immemorial.
Well, tell me, what are some of those quotes that you love from Marianne?
Okay, so one of my favorite quotes from Marianne is it's not like a super popular quote, but it's just a sentiment I've heard her say over and over again. And it's just about rising to be the person you're capable of being. And I just love that, because that to me is another way, and maybe even a better way of saying be the best version of yourself,
Yes.
Because I know when I say I want to be the best version of myself, sometimes I don't quite know what that looks like exactly. I don't know what that feels like. It sounds nice, but like, what is that really? But when I ask myself, who am I capable of being in this moment? It's much more accessible. It's less lofty and more real in the moment. And that's just a really powerful question that like, I just try to keep in mind, like, am I being the person I'm capable of being right now? And that's definitely from Marianne.
That's a great question, because the best version, we could always think it could be better.
Right.
Best is like the top of the better.
Right. Exactly.
So I can see where your brain would think that's a little too lofty, but what am I capable of being right now?
Yeah.
That's a really good one. What other kind of questions do you ask yourself?
What would love have me do? When I don't know what to do in a situation, and like especially when I'm feeling very triggered on something, and I have some strong emotions, it's like, okay, I can give into this anger, fear, whatever this strong triggered state is, or do what love would have me do. And it's that right there. It's just it's like a salve, for whatever the wound I'm experiencing is. It's just like, it calms me down. And I'm not saying it happens and works every single time, but it works well enough that like it's a good go-to, and it's very hard to act, hatefully or unlovingly when you've really tried to ask yourself that question a few times and anchor into that.
Yeah. So you talked about being triggered. When you are triggered, what are some of the practices that you try to do to help yourself to de-escalate those strong emotions?
Sure. So my favorite thing at the moment to do is just to observe the thought that I'm triggered, like, ooh, this is really upsetting me. Wow. And just enjoy that observation versus being at the mercy of it, and just having that distance where it's like, why is this so juicy, and calling it juicy. This is a juicy trick. Like, ooh, this one goes deep, and it adds a level of levity to the situation that like, it's just like, it's not that serious. Even if it is serious, it's like, it doesn't have to be also consuming,
Right.
and I think that's really, really helpful, is just having a bit of mindfulness with it.
Yeah, that's really good. And then what do you do?
Sure. And then from there, just try to breathe through it. Like, okay, I'm triggered. This is happening. Like, I am going there now in my body, in my mind. And then, again, like, to the best of my ability, I'll try myself different things. Number one, like, if someone is upsetting me, it's like, maybe they're not trying to. Maybe they are, but maybe they're not trying to. Maybe I don't know what they're going through right now. maybe they need love right now, who knows, just as a quick side note, like I remember my father was going through cancer treatments and things. He'd get up every morning and go get his cancer treatments and then have to go on with the rest of his day. But he'd feel sick, he'd feel tired, dizzy, whatever. He wasn't feeling his best. And like, I remember thinking like, any person in this world could be like my father who just got cancer treatment this morning. So maybe they're not being nice or maybe they're being rude, but like, you don't know what they've been through this morning or last week or what they're going through. You have no idea. So it's just trying to, remind myself like, hey, this situation sucks right now. It's not fun, but like, I don't have to let this just be the end of the world, and for a long time, like if I was triggered, it's all bets were off. I'm mad. So now everyone, has to know how mad I am and how right I am. And, like none of that anymore. It's just, God bless you. I don't know what's going on with you, but God bless you. And like, let's find a way for me to like remove myself until I'm less triggered is what I would say.
I'm amazed. So many of the things that you're saying, I could fill in the rest of the sentence, because I remember when my kids were little and they were asking me, why does that person act that way? And they were just like, they're so grumpy, why do they act like that? And the impression came to me. I said, what if they had cancer and they were just so sick? I said, then what would you think? And they're like, oh, well, then it would make sense. No wonder they're being grumpy. And I said, how would you filter them? And they were like, oh, well, we would feel sad for them that they were grumpy. Of course they're grumpy if they're having chemotherapy. And so that's so amazing that you had a life experience with your dad that cemented that thought into you then to look at other people, because we don't know what other people are going through.
Right. And also it could be me, like maybe I'm the problem, like I try not to rule that out, that like I might be the one that's in the wrong here, and the more I can slow down and really think about it versus just feeling so wronged, it's just like, well, hold on, like just slow down. The more the world could slow down and be less quick to anger or judgment, the better off we'll all be.
Yes. And so one of the things that Marianne talks so much about is the ego. Could you explain that for our listeners who aren't familiar with Marianne Williamson or her terminology? Could you explain the ego?
Sure. So the ego, as my understanding is of course refers to it as a tiny mad thought, and it's like that voice in our head that's just goes to the negativity, goes to the fear, goes to the lack, it's like gravity, it's there, but you don't have to always be at the mercy of it, it's just the perception of fear and problems that like we all have. There's no getting rid of it. I think it's just a matter of how do we learn to manage it? How do we learn from it? I feel like I've learned a lot from my ego because it shows me where I'm wounded. It shows me where I need to work on some things, and so rather than trying to destroy it or hate it, like some, different people try to say, like, banish the ego, I actually would prefer to partner with my ego. It's not a part of me that's my favorite, but it's a part of me that is here to stay and I can learn to love it. And when it acts up and needs attention, that means it needs love, That's how I describe it.
Oh, Tessa, that is so beautiful, because so many times when I am trying to figure out, wait, what's going on? My question is, what just happened? When I get triggered and I'm like, I don't understand, I really do. I ask that question, what just happened? What's going on here? And so many times when I do step back and just take a minute to listen, I realize that I have a wound that has been bumped into, and that my ego is coming into play because I'm hurting. And so it's trying to protect me somehow, or it's trying to teach me that I'm not totally healed. Sometimes I think, oh, there's that thing again. I thought I was over that, and I'm realizing, nope, there's another layer that still needs some love. Like you said, some love. And because there is that harsh mentality that I think is counterproductive, really, because what we really need, and our inner child really needs, because that child, it's usually a wound from some time in the past, that child needs that love and compassion instead of the judgment towards ourselves.
Right. I've wasted a lot of time and energy of my life trying to like overcome the ego and control the ego and be mad at myself because I'm bumping into fear. And it's just like, that's just not time well spent. Like, that's not how you get through the hard stuff. There's an easier way to do it. And the easier way is a path that is more loving, more forgiving, less judgmental, and more peaceful.
I love that, because that is the anecdote to the self-criticism and the
Yes.
self-loathing that we have so
Yes.
much. Because
Yes.
many times when we're trying to be the best version of ourselves, we are critical of ourselves when we're not the best version.
Mhm, mhm.
The irony of it. And then
Absolutely.
that blocks us, from becoming and acting, in love.
Absolutely. The term best version of myself or of yourself is interesting and juicy in and of itself to me because it's like that almost has a little bit of ego in there too. It's like best. Okay, like what does best mean? Like, will I ever
Right.
get there? Because if I'm just never, am I never gonna ever be happy? I'll never arrive, or is it more of a journey to like you just keep ascending higher and higher, and there's no limit to how great we can be. It's like we had to kind of like I would recommend for at least for myself to like keep an eye on the ego because it's very insidious, as Marianne would say. It's very cunning and crafty, and it'll get you in surprising ways. And so it's just a matter of like being mindful of like whenever you start to feel like that thing where you're comparing yourself or you feel like you're not good enough, and it's just like that vicious voice versus the voice telling you to be better. It's like you're not good enough. It's like that's the ego. Be careful there.
Right, absolutely. So have you had some experiences that have helped you to learn forgiveness? You had mentioned forgiveness to
Mm.
me, and I was wondering if you could tell us the backstory about your lessons learning forgiveness in your life.
I'm trying to think of anything particular. I think it's more of like an attitude that like has helped me the most, where it's like I stopped keeping score of like what's been done to me. And that's almost probably why it's hard for me to recall because it's like I try to forgive and move on. Like, you know what? Like, yes, you wronged me, or I felt wronged, or whatever. We had a fight. I release it. I let it go. Like, I'm not gonna carry it with me. And that's just something that like the old Tessa, like maybe 10, 12 years ago, that was like, younger and less experienced would think, but they were wrong. But like they need to pay for what they did to me. And I need to show them how right I was. It's like, Tessa, forgive them, move on. Just forgive them. Like you don't know what they were going through. Like we said earlier, you don't know what factors went into this. And again, like I said, like maybe I was part of the problem. I was probably part of the problem too. And so it's just a combination of like like the commitment to forgiving others. And when I say forgive, I don't mean forget. Like you gotta show self-care and be careful who you share space with and whose energy you allow to interact with your own. But it's a journey of like both forgiving yourself and forgiving others at the same time.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting principle there because my younger self would often say, but that person did that thing first. I was just happily doing my own thing and they came in and just and I think, why are you acting like that? I didn't even have anything to do with you. And then all of a sudden, like the person that comes home and kicks the dog, like they had a bad day at work and they come home and kick the dog. The dog didn't like do something to
Right.
that person. They were
Right.
just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so I know that can be very challenging, in relationships, that if the other person had their chemotherapy that day or whatever struggle that they were dealing with that caused them to come home and be angry like that,
Right.
that the ego wants to hold on to that and say, but they did that first. But it doesn't really matter. What
I
really
know.
matters is how can we get back to love? How can we both
Yes.
get back to love?
Yes.
And I
Yes.
love how Marianne Williamson always says, it's the person who is the most sane, it's their job.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And she's right.
Because the person, yeah, because the person who comes home like that, that's so angry, they're not in a position at that moment, but the person who is perfectly happy probably has more love at that moment and they're thinking
Yes.
more in a more sane way.
Absolutely. I love how she puts it that way. She makes it so like real and applicable. Like it's just, yes, I love that.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people feel like, wait, that's not my responsibility. They acted like that. And so
Mhm.
I think that it's a higher level of consciousness, really.
Yes. Yes.
Another thing that I love that she says is that I'm a being of love and
Mhm.
that you are a being of love. And
Yeah.
that when I can remember that, that is a core truth for me.
And that's her whole book is a return to love. Like your thought process right there, that's your return to love every time. And
Yeah.
that's where I think we find our peace. It's like I choose peace. And it's
Yes.
interesting how like not every time, but how so many times it doesn't matter if you were right or if you were if they were in the wrong. And I don't mean like in abusive situations or extreme situations. I mean like in like everyday triggering, annoying things. It's so funny how that applies.
Yeah, I'm so glad I'm so glad you brought that up, because in those difficult, abuse type situations, when someone tries to apply this, it feels a little off, and they struggle with, wait, how do I set boundary if, I just don't know how to implement that. And so I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, because many of our listeners are either dealing with abusive situations or they have a loved one that is.
Sure. So yeah, so I would say like first things first, take care of yourself and get in tune with like when boundaries have been violated, you know? And it's like, I'm not a professional in this, but this is just like, what I would say to this is self-betrayal, like you get a sense of like when something is wrong, really, really wrong, when you tune in and realize, am I betraying myself? It's no longer about necessarily what the person's doing to me. It's like, what am I allowing to be done to me? And if it's something that's just like crossing a line that's making me abandon who I am and what I stand for, that's a problem. That's a red flag. That means you might need some help in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for talking about that, because I think that whole concept about abandoning ourselves is another really deep concept. Could
Mhm.
you talk some more about that and elaborate on? Because I know a lot of people are going to say, what does she mean abandon myself?
Sure. Yes. I mean, I guess I don't know if I've ever had to put it into words, but it's a concept that like when I first heard about it, I'm like, what is that? That's amazing. Doing that, that's resonating for some reason. I'm not even sure what it even means, but I think it just means like when we aren't our own best self advocate, and when we value ourselves as much as we value the person that we love the most in the world, and if we wouldn't let them be treated a certain way, we need to apply that level of love to ourselves, and it's really hard to do this sometimes. A lot of times, especially women, we're taught take care of everybody else first. We can wait. We don't matter as much. Everyone else needs this and that. Then I might get the scraps that are left over, and so it's very toxic programming we have as a society, at least here in the West. And I think it's probably a problem all over the world, for women all over the world. But it's that
Yes.
self-betrayal and self-abandonment is how I would define just like when we lose sight of what we need and what we deserve, and it's not being a princess about anything. You have to protect your own personhood.
And for me, that is loving myself. And that's,
Yes.
remembering, that, like, even just taking time for that self-care, that is a form of loving myself. A lot of times people, when they first hear about self-care, they think it's selfish, but
Mm.
it's interesting when we understand the principle of, like, putting our oxygen mask on first.
And it's tempting to like think, well, no, I can wait. I don't need this and that. But it's like, well, okay, do it your way and then watch when things fall apart. In my experience, things totally fall apart at a certain point when I'm self-abandoning, when I'm not doing my own self-care. Like nobody really, really wins when we do that.
I was going to ask you about another thing that a lot of people wonder about. And so when we're in a conflict of some sort, and our feelings are hurt, or we feel angry or whatever, and we're reacting to that situation, there's a saying out there that you give your power away. And a
Mm.
lot of times when people hear that phrase, they're like, what do you mean I give my power away? I'm not giving my power to them.
Mhm.
And so could you explain that in more detail? Because I think that's an almost an elusive concept that people, when they're trying to grasp hold of that, are like, it just feels like a slippery fish. You just
Right.
can't grab a hold of it.
That's a tough one to describe, but it's so powerful. And once you've lost it, you know it. Like I've gotten an argument with a cousin of mine recently. I'm a maid of honor in her wedding, and we had a disagreement about something that was really intense. And I lost my cool, and I was like, no, like this is what you don't want to do. And so it's how I would define it is like, when you let your emotions get the better of you, when you let your ego preside over like, I'm running things, I'm going to be right, I'm going to show you how wrong you are, I'll be the loudest or the meanest or whatever, and it's just all that power you have internally being used to harm someone else in some way. And like it usually probably emotionally, and it's losing that power, and rather than keeping it for yourself, where you say, you know what, like I need to take a break. I need to call you back. I need to take a few minutes and center myself. So I guess the best way I can describe it is like when we're not centered, when we're just all over the place, or explosive. And that's just, I've lived that life of being like that, and it's no fun. I'm not saying it's easy to walk the path we're talking about of this, like, self-enlightenment kind of thing, but like it's better than like losing control.
And one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of our listeners are dealing with depression and anxiety. And a lot of times I have worked with women who they don't have that, like, it's not always like a fiery type of angry outburst. Sometimes it's it because they say that depression is anger turned inward. And so a lot of times when they just can't stop thinking about the way that they were wronged, and they are hurt by that, and they feel rejected, betrayed, abandoned, by somebody or whatever. And so when they're told, don't react to that, basically, they're like, how could I not react to that? That person did that thing, and that hurts me so deeply, and I feel rejected. And so trying to take their power back, that's when I think it really feels so elusive, because it makes sense that you're hurt, and trying to take their power back is very foreign for most people, especially in that situation when they're feeling depressed. So I wonder if you could talk about that side of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's really tough. It really is tough. And I'm trying to think of like the best way to describe it, the best way I would, recommend to do that, because finding a way to process that energy is what I think has always saved me. Like I don't ever deny the intense energy I feel towards my anger, my sadness, my frustration, whatever, disappointment. That usually looks like journaling. I also write poetry at times, where I can just be as honest as I need to be in ways I couldn't be with someone who I'm talking to.
Yeah.
It's finding those creative outlets for that energy. Cause I think when we don't express energy, that's when I know for me, it feels like it's just turned against me, like you said. So,
right.
yeah.
Right. Oh, that is really great. I find the same thing for me is if I can't talk about it, then writing about it, is very healing for me. And I am able to put it in perspective, and I find it very healing to be able to write about that. And so another thing that when you were mentioning about giving, and about how we just, abandon ourselves and wait for the crumbs, if there are any crumbs left over, and how that's such a common thing, for women in our society. And we're thinking, wait a minute, I don't feel so wonderful. And
Right.
so could share with us your thoughts about that.
Sure. So I would just add that I feel like there's never a good time to start, kind of protecting your energy and doing, entering a new level of your personal development journey, but like, why not? Like, why not start now? Why not start now? And it's one of those things where it's like having a new attitude, having a new boundary, a loving boundary where it's like, I love you, like I will give what I can. I will do my best, with all the love in the world. But that does not mean I'm going to be completely depleted until I'm a pile of sawdust, like I'm not available for that right now or anymore,
Right. Oh, I totally agree. And so if a person is saying, no, I'm not going to be able to do that, and, I, with all love in my heart, no. And then the other person is reacting to them, with their reaction. What does the woman in this situation, what does she do next?
I would say, I love you. And my answer is no. I love you completely. And this is what I'm able to give you, and I'll share an example with you that this happened to me for Thanksgiving. So I had a relative that invited me to their Thanksgiving dinner. And, my husband and I were considering it, and I made it very clear that like we were considering a few other options as well for the dinner, but like we were leaning towards their dinner. And after some discussions, my husband and I decided we would like to stay at home for Thanksgiving, just the two of us, and have a quiet, private little dinner, And this relative was really, really angry with me about this, like so offended, so hurt, took it so personal. And, I did my best to tell them, like, this is nothing personal. Like, this is just what my husband and I would like to do, and maybe we can go out to brunch the Saturday after Thanksgiving or something. I'd still like to see you and still like to see the family or whatever, but like, we won't be attending your dinner. And there was a lot of pressure, a lot of shaming, a lot of attack I was receiving. And it would have been so much easier to be like, okay, fine, we'll go to the dinner, like just to stop the attack on me, but it was like, this is my beautiful boundary. And, like, you don't get to take that away from me. And so, it's not easy, people. It's not easy, but like my husband and I had the beautiful, quiet Thanksgiving that we wanted because I had that like kind but firm boundary.
I love that. This is my beautiful boundary. That is such a beautiful way to look at it, because
Yeah.
like I was saying, even with boundaries, the same as with self-care, so many times it feels selfish to not give in that way, to that person. But
Yeah.
when we have a strong feeling about that, and we need that for ourselves for whatever reason, I think that's what that comes in, that we can abandon ourselves when we don't set that boundary.
Absolutely.
And um, another thing that I think is interesting about boundaries is how a lot of times when we first hear about boundaries, we think it's about the other person. Like, I'm going to put a fence up,
Yeah.
to block the other person. If you do that, then you're going to get this consequence, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's really more about ourselves. And can you talk a little bit about how boundaries are really about what we're going to do ourselves?
Yeah. I mean, I think that like, I'm trying to remember when I had this thought, but I remember realizing at some point, like, I am my only protector, really. I have to protect my inner self, my inner life. And the best way to do that is not through, you know, forcing people to do what I want or trying to manipulate them to do what I want to take care of me. It's no, I establish what I need that has nothing to do with anybody else, and people are welcome to come up to that boundary, and if they hit it, I just calmly, peacefully let them know. And so it's just like, it's an energy that like, it's like a bubble of protection that I have for myself, and people hit against it all the time, and when I let them know, they get mad that I'm not giving them what they want, and that's just part of the deal. And it's like, I let people down all the time with this, but I know in my heart of hearts that, like, for the most part, the overwhelming majority of the time, it really truly was them crossing a boundary with me versus me being harsh to them. And so I just recommend anybody who's listening, like,
Yeah.
just protecting your energy, protecting your space and your peace with just that loving place that you're not going to overgive. You're not going to self-abandon. You're going to say, here's what I'm available for, and here's what I'm not available for.
And thank you so much for talking about protecting your peace, because so many times that's the problem that happens, is that when we give too much, then we start to feel resentful. And for me, resentment is a barometer. When I don't recognize it in advance, and then I feel the resentment, I'm like, uh-oh, I know that something's lopsided here. It's out of balance. And so I have to correct, course correct, kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
But also when I have set boundaries and the other person reacts, and they're angry that I'm not doing what they want me to do, to continue to respond with love is also a way to protect my peace, and to not take on that negative, that negative energy. As an empath, that's kind of challenging for me sometimes.
Yes.
And so,
Yeah. And sometimes the other person's coming at you, like they are trying to get to you, they're trying to upset you, or they're trying to get something from you. And that is just, it can be so difficult. Like, this is not easy work. This inner work is not easy for the faint of heart, but it's so worth it. And it's so important.
yeah. And so thank you so much for sharing that, because that example was so perfect.
And that's what I showed my relative, really, because I mean, this relative was really mad at me. I mean, I got cursed out like more than once, basically, by this person that I love dearly. And I knew they were just angry and hurt I wasn't going to be there, because they loved me that much. They wanted me to be there. And it's a matter of, now I think that I set the tone of like, we don't do that anymore for holidays. We're not fighting about this. If someone can't make it, okay, they can't make it, and it's setting the new normal. So that, I think that that's just my suggestion of like setting that new normal.
Well, and what a beautiful way to reframe that. When the other person is angry, when you set a boundary and they want you to do something, trying to force you to do something, and to realize, because one of the things that helps me is to rewrite the script. So when they're saying, something negative to me about the situation, whatever it is, I try and say in my head, what would they say if they were feeling love right now? They're acting loveless right at the moment. And you just did that, because you said, what they're really saying is that they really want me to be there. And if they were full of love at that moment, that's what your relative would have said to you. And you just did that exact thing right at that moment. And I think that is a powerful tool for us, because when someone is having a strong reaction and directing that towards us, our ego so much wants to react and defend and attack back. But when we can step back and look at them, remember that we're a being of love, and remember that they are, and look at their unmet need. What are they trying to communicate? What is that unmet need? And to turn it into a positive, they really want to be with me. That's exactly what was at the root of driving that.
That's what it was. Yeah. And I'll add too, because like, just to be clear, I was not perfect in those conversations where I was getting attacked. For the most part, I was in this dropped in peaceful place. But, at a certain point, she got to me, a couple of times.
Sure.
And then it goes back to that loop of just like, you have to forgive yourself. You have to forgive the other person, and like, yes, you can be mad at them or stay mad at yourself because I didn't do it perfectly, but like, that doesn't help anything. So it's like that, just to bring back to the very beginning about that forgiveness. It's just going to be a huge part of any human interaction,
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for that reminder, because even though we, can discuss these wonderful tools and ways of thinking, we're human. And sometimes, we do have reactions, and then that's okay. Then we get a chance to practice, and we get to extend grace to ourselves and extend grace to them, and have compassion for all involved and show love.
Exactly. And we do it all over again the next day, and that's the way it goes. And the work never ends, and I would say it does get easier, but like, you do get challenged in different ways. And I kind of feel like in a certain sense, like, and sometimes, when I get like, when I get triggered and I give in to that, like, oh, well, I was right though, but they were so wrong, it's like, Tessa, that was a test. That was a test, and you failed it right there, and that's okay. But now, this is where you need to work on, so it's almost like seeing those, opportunities for my own growth as like little winks from the universe of like, you got some work to do here.
Right. And just like you were saying about the wound, here it's just another opportunity for you to learn, because a test really in school, like if we quote, quote, fail a test, it just shows us, well, there's a place that we need to study more and we need to learn more. And so, and I've always thought it's really not a failure if we learn from it. The failure is when we don't learn. And so, and sometimes that takes time to learn things. I think we have to be kind to ourselves also, that some things we struggle with most of our life, if not all of our life, and so I have been, fortunate to see that this is all about practicing down here. And we just have lots of opportunities and lots of people, different personalities and different situations, and we're at different stages in our life and different levels of awareness even. And so we just get to keep practicing.
Absolutely. And that's all it is all a big practice. And that's the beauty, is like, if you fail at practice, it's not really failing, right? It's just, you're just learning. And, and it's reminded me of my parents, because my parents have been married for 50 years. And they've told me that like the same things they used to argue about when they were 22, when they got married, are the same things they argue about now when they're like 72, And so like, it's so funny that like the things that trigger us will probably always trigger us in some way. We just handle it better, but it doesn't necessarily go away. It's just a practice that you just have to do.
Yeah, I have to keep reminding myself that right now the goal is to shorten that span between being reacting and getting back to consciousness and choosing love. That used to take me a lot longer, and now it comes quicker than it did when I was young. And so I love progress. I just love to celebrate progress. And so, yeah, we do. We just get to keep practicing. And
and one last thing I'll think of, just to mention, because I'm thinking of it too, is like, I try to think about like the people who I admire, who write all these motivational books, like a Marianne Williamson, Dr. Wayne Dyer, when he was living. All these people, they have bad days too. They have fights with their relatives and their spouse or whatever, and disputes with their neighbors. Like we're all human, like we're all doing the best we can, and that's the best we can do,
Exactly. And we're doing the best we can at this moment, and if we don't have the awareness right now because we're triggered or because we haven't learned it yet, well, we are doing the best that we can. I was going to ask you if you had any recommendations for our readers of some of your favorite books.
Oh, sure. I'll actually give you a list of things you could post. But number one, Return to Love, which you mentioned, life-changing book.
We are just together on that Return to Love book.
Yes. I'll also add in there The Audacity to Be Queen by Gina DeVee. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but she also studied under Marianne, actually, when Marianne was in Michigan. And it's a beautiful book about, being the queen of your life and actually just owning the fact that like you are worthy of the things you desire, you know. Such a powerful book. Right now I'm reading Ask and It Is Given by Esther Hicks. And that's a very interesting
Oh,
book on manifestation, law of attraction, that kind of stuff. Like I would say those are my top 3 at the moment that like just are great books just to return to, not just read once, but to return to for the deep lessons. Because every time I read these books, and I've read each one more than once, like I get a different, deeper lesson each and every time.
oh, that's beautiful. Yes, I'm the same way. I've read Return to Love several times, and I have books that I keep going back to too.
Yes,
And if
exactly.
you had any links that you would like to share with our listeners so that they could, if they want to contact you or they wanted to learn more about you, how could we get a hold of you?
Sure. I'm at the Best Self Collective on Instagram, and then the Best Self Collective podcast on anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Awesome. The Best Self Collective. Well, Tessa, thank you so much for being with us tonight. It was just wonderful to visit with you today. And I just appreciate all your insights and all your life experience and all your studying and absorbing information from the womb. It's just glorious. I just love it. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you, Karen. You're a light. Thank you so much.